which is a fat-soluble vitamin and can actually be very harmful. So they are not regulated. They may cause potential damage to their profit, unless it is very clearly stated in the air and unproven why recommend them, why sell them. And I say this as someone who can make a fortune. I mean, you said to yourself 12 million followers. You know, I take a little boxing selfie and say, the reason why this crisis is due to the fact that I take everything I bottled into my house, these pills. Whatever powder I want, nobody checks it and I could sell it. And becoming a multi-millionaire. For sure nobody checks it, nobody checks it, nobody checks that. Nobody checks that these supplements are not like now. We could bottle on the table our miracle formula. We can, let's call it a miracle cure, yes. As long as we don't claim it treats a specific medical condition that requires a doctor's treatment. Doctor. Okay. And I just put some buzzwords on it, so instead of saying it helps your depression, I say depression immunity support, just buzzwords, feel good. Feel good, happy, natural, simple of the earth, we could sell it. How much we don't have to do it. Get anything. We don't need to get anything. Approved by anyone, how much do you think we would make? Too much money, and that's why it's as a guy I understand why people do it, and there's the idea that they could potentially work. There's always like a little evidence emerges that will just cut short the miracle that is, it's so tempting that I understand, and I understand that there is also that I don't want to label. Everyone paints a broad picture and says they're bad and just trying to make money. Some people believe they're working. They want to believe that's the case. This is what characterizes us as a society, and I wish it were true. It was as simple as giving people supplements, or that eating 8 almonds a day would extend your life by 10 years. I wish that were the case. The topic around the gut microbiome is something I've talked about a lot in this podcast, because I just had a lot of experts talk to me about topics and something that I didn't even know existed 3 years ago. I didn't realize it. There were lots of microbes in my stomach. There are prebiotics, probiotics, all of these things that are coming out now to improve what they call it. It's not the intestinal flora, it's the microbiota encompasses all of this. Is it true that prebiotics and probiotics are useful for, well, there is some truth in the fact that we have all these living organisms inside us creates a very strong interconnection between how we experience illnesses and the species of these microbes that exist in us. The account by there is some evidence that people who generally consume specific foods rich in these substances may have better health results than those who don't. But handling these bugs has not been proven or clear in the majority of cases where people promise to do it. As we know, consuming fiber is correlated with better health and less negative health. Do we know that taking a prebiotic supplement does the same thing? We don't know. Do we know that having specific bacteria in the gut are destroyed? If you have a health problem, we know that. But does that mean that restoring it by taking it in pill form will solve this problem? We don't know that, but people will make that leap and say it's okay. We're trying to help. But for me, This is an important matter because we are promising something we are not sure about, without even having good evidence. While there are very few conditions that probiotics can actually help with, what advice would you give to someone who comes into your office and you identify that he has a problem related to his gut microbiome? Is there anything you would recommend they do to improve their micro education? Well, it would be to focus on food which are considered healthy for the microbiome. So foods rich in plant fiber essentially prevent bad habits: poor sleep, excessive alcohol consumption, smoking. All these things are unhealthy. The thing that makes health advice so boring is that the things that grandmother told us, that's what I still say in my office, and it's not sexy and it puts people to sleep, but it's true that it's what we know works. I don't have a perfect answer to this question, and there are currently tests on the market to check your microbiome, to find out what food too preliminary to be recommended. We don't know what to do with the information. The promises they make does not resist when looking at long-term genetic testing. The potential is there for a lot of value. Most of them are very preliminary, unless you are working with a geneticist on a very specific condition. So I think the hype often accelerates increased product sales before the evidence is there. They exceed the evidence, and in some cases medicine does it as well as traditional medicine, but it does it with some thought. Think, for example, if we create an emergency use authorization, or if we allow someone to have an exemption from treatment for something that is not proven for a disease that is already deadly, that they are going to lose their lives anyway. Or if we don't act now, we are going to lose so many lives in Themament. So yes, there might be cases where we can speed up the process of certain things, that we can create shortcuts because we take this compromise which is thoughtful, but with many of these products, they come and go, and there's so much misinformation around them, you know. As one of the great individuals who done this in this space, and hate to single it out, but it's been such a one voice in this community, is Gary Brea. You know, I talked about him on my show. Have you spoken to him? No, he seems like a very good person. He seems very passionate about who he is. Talk about, but the promises that are in progress are not proven, and the intention may be good, and good intentions can have bad results. But if the information isn't accurate, it doesn't matter how passionate you are, the long-term subject. It will have negative consequences when you use the word proven. Do you mean that there is? This is not a significant or reliable research base that has been carried out. You still need to validate the hypotheses or the assertions, or else you don't say that it's been disproven. It just hasn't been proven, yeah. So it's a good time to bring up the things that I say that are inaccurate, have not been widely refuted. Because if I say the juice inside this mug will help you live forever, would you say that's true or no? The theory would be that it's not true. But can you disprove it? No, you would have to conduct a study to refute it. Yes, and that's how I operate as a doctor. So I can't refute what he says, because otherwise I have to conduct my own study. But based on what we know, remember what I said at the beginning when a new study sort I try to bring it to the already established information that we have. It does not correspond to what we know that it is true. If you want to go against the public health standards of what we have established as science, you better have a good reason to do it, and if you do, I'm all ears. I'm excited for this kind of thing if you have a clear idea of why you disagree with the CDC, the White House, and Harvard Health. Please tell me why you disagree. But if you disagree, it's because you said so. This is where things get problematic, as I'll give you the simplest example. There's a very famous clip that I have reacted on my podcast, where Gary Brea says that if you have headaches, it's because you're running out of Himalayan pink salt. How many reasons do you think this is due to? People get headaches for many reasons. You're not even a doctor, are you? My brother has had chronic headaches since he was a child. You just had a concussion. Stress. You have a hormonal problem. You have a tumor. There are so many. You have migraines. You have a neck cramp. What is it? The possibilities are endless. It is right to have the confidence to say that it is what you lack everything. Else hardly matters. Confidence is the misinformation as a remark every time you asked me a question today. It was either I don't know, it depends nuance for whom it is almost annoying because I can never give a clear answer, but it is what science is, and that's actually why people have lost faith in science. Because we're not as confident as Gary Brea. When he talks about salt for headaches, sometimes you're wrong. Of course. Sometimes you have... I remember reading something where you said that I admit that I changed my mindset when confronted with new information and explained why I think when we think about doctors. This is the part that I think some people struggle with. If you look at the sorting course 10, 20, 30, 40 over the years, some of the things we were told were healthy back then are no longer healthy. And new information about me. I am well aware that this is a scientific model, but I am trying to present the counter-argument. Put yourself in your shoes, yeah. How do we know who to trust when doctors say they were wrong and change their minds on a particular subject? Critical things before, and even when we think about misinformation about vaccines, a lot of things. The arguments you'll get from the right are that you said that, and now look what happened. So we'll never trust you again. How do we navigate and know who to believe? Even doctors, when doctors say information I have given you in the past, it was no longer true. You had to take the hard road and do the work for find out why they said what they said back then, and why they changed their minds. Now I'll give you an example. Actually, maybe it's not a doctor, it's studies. I remember having a guest in my podcast that talked about, I think there was a bit of a crisis with depression medication in the early years where they had, because of the way the tests were done by the big pharmaceutical companies, the CEO of the pharmaceutical company, the company knew the depression drug wasn't working and had all these side effects, but they pushed it forward even. Although the vast majority of studies did not show the drug to be effective, they found one study that, if they had passed it, could have brought heaps of kids used it. And then I think a decade later, I'm paraphrasing here and putting the link to what I'm talking about below, I found out that the CEO of this company knew it didn't work. But there was a study and research that put it on the market, and people started using it. I think Johan Hari, who was on my podcast before it was the Zemek episode that we released, he was one of the people, like a young man, who started taking this medication for depression, only to find that 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, It didn't work, and the CEO knew it didn't really work. So that was it. Trust in the medical system. It was confidence in research. It was confidence in the big farmers. A large part of the movement we see now is that we think that big farmers are corrupt, and we think that they are meddling with doctors to get drugs on the market. That may not work. There are a lot of drugs on the market. Okay. Yes. If the science is so problematic and we should not be trusted for all these reasons, why is this the only example we seek to find of the error that what happened or the fraud that happened with this drug? We are talking about something that happened decades ago. Fraud happens. It happens in healthcare. It happens in law enforcement. It happens that politicians are involved in fraud. But we must highlight this episode and say, we should throw away the whole land. It will cause a loss for us, and there are problems with the pharmaceutical industry. There are huge problems with the pharmaceutical industry. I often speak even from the point of view of pharmaceutical industry pricing, how problematic they are. We have seen the problems with the opioid epidemic was largely caused by the pharmaceutical industry, but we call them. The beauty of Western medicine is that we are the best at calling. We realize our failures. But in reality, the more we denounce our failures, the more we believe in ourselves, lost, and in fact, when someone is accountable for their failures and seeks to learn from them, and seeks to make a change, this is the person you want to follow. The person who has no self-confidence, who is open to transparency, who explains why these things happen without 100% trust. That is the people who give you advice that is true. In the same way we said earlier, that everything is natural. It doesn't mean that everything is good. Not everything that is for profit is necessarily bad. My YouTube channel is for profit. I make a very good living doing what I do. That doesn't mean it's wrong. So even if it's easy to do shortcuts and overgeneralize, we must talk about specific instances and call balls and strikes. Because it is referees who make mistakes in the health sector. We have made mistakes. There have been vaccine-related incidents in the past that have hurt people. We have learned from them. We have studied it. We are convinced that there are doctors who are constantly studying the areas in which we need to do better is going on at all times, and the irony is that most people have no idea that it happens, because we only discover its existence on subjects that we are passionate about. I recently made a video where I was on a podcast where I was asked a question about birth control. I gave a very simple answer. It was not motivated in any way. It was just presenting the information as it was. There was a lot of very nasty stuff comments in this information about how birth control can potentially harm people. I don't believe it's negative side effects that can come with all these statements that have been made, and I found out that they were not true. I'd like to do some soul searching to see if that was true, because I do that with all the negative comments. And I said no. Birth control can have side effects like any medication. The reason why birth control is perhaps brought up, because it is a topic that many people are passionate about. It is a topic where doctors have discriminated in the past. So it's a little bit more triggering for the emotional part of our brain. But if we look at what's driving drug-related hospitalizations in the United States, you don't see Tylenol. Someone is causing a stir by making YouTube videos saying that Tylenol is problematic. What are Tylenol, acetamine, and paracetamol used for? Paracetamol? Yeah, the number of hospitalizations for Tylenol-induced liver failure is huge. I'm sure we could put the stats up on the screen. But no one gets upset about Tylenol, because it's no emotional trigger. And this is true for all healthcare. There are side effects to taking medications, so it's easy to focus on only one part of that equation. For example, the doctors said that, but why did the doctors say that? What led them to say it there? And the idea that we achieve it perfectly will never be true. We are always working with incomplete information. All medicine is simply our best. Guess how many of you started thinking about your long-term health when you hit 30? For me, it was a wake-up call. I was like, okay, I should probably start paying a little more attention now. I've already felt a change myself when I'm 30, with things like my metabolism and energy level, so this year it's no different, Zoe, which is a company I've invested in, but also a company that sponsors this podcast, helps me to make smarter food choices, all based on their cutting-edge science and my own test results if I order food. I know how to make my takeout much smarter by adding things like a side of vegetables to eat first, or choosing the option with the most fiber. Zoe helps me make this choice. She guides me and coaches me. It's my personalized nutrition coach that I have with me 24/7 to help you kickstart your Zoe journey and start making smarter food choices. I'm offering you 10% off when you join Zoe now. All you have to do is use code C10 at checkout when you sign up. Enjoy. And let me know how you get on. What about those animal studies? A lot of the research that is presented, experts come from animal studies, rats and things like that. Yeah, that's where people like to skip steps. So the pharmaceutical industry is looking for money. That's true. That's their job. They're trying to create a return on investment for their products. Shareholders try to select the research to be done that will hopefully generate the greatest profits. 99% of the things they start when looking at the initial promise of animal studies, 90% of them fail and they only pick the top. Then you go even further once it works in animal studies in petri dishes. Then it goes to human trials. 99% of the others fail. So the idea that something has mechanistic value then works in a petri dish and then works in an animal model so that it can carry out all these steps. So astronomically rare that it ends up working for the general population. The fact is, we shouldn't move from animal model to human model, because 99% of this will fail. So what do we say? Then do we have to, go back to the life that our ancestors lived? And because I said earlier that the world we live in has become more unnatural. Yes. So this is the antidote to all of that. We talk about whether to become human again, and as we always say, the ancestors were fine. I think what we need to look at is the evolution of humans and the anthropological aspect of it, because then we can better understand ourselves now and why we have problems with this unnatural world. So if you look at why anxiety was a survival advantage for us back then versus how it could be very problematic for us now in a safer world to study, prehistoric cavemen would be beneficial, but drawing conclusions from their diet and potentially what they ate all men, you're going to fall into so many misconceptions and prejudices that the information won't be great and not very applicable if you could rethink society in such a way that it would be in your mind healthier for the average human. You had to start from scratch to be president of the United States. Trump doesn't get it. Biden doesn't get it. Dr. Mike gets it. And you really could rewire society. What are the types of macroeconomic changes that you would make? Okay, I'm going to put everything on the table. That's the first thing I would do, and it's the echo of one of the authors and experts that I really enjoy listening to, and he will soon be coming to my podcast, Jonathan Hauteur. I would think we should remove phones from schools the same way we regulate addictions, substances like cigarettes, like vaping, like alcohol for those who are adults. We need them to start thinking about this for social media. And it's an unpopular thing, but I think if you really look at it, there are a lot of problems that can arise. There is very little benefit for a 13-year-old to look at these images. So I think major changes need to be made in the schools where you were elected. 2015. You know, it was a long time ago, 10 years ago in 2015. You were appointed People the magazine's sexiest doctor. I don't think I was elected. I think they just nominated me. Well, that's something, isn't it? Yeah, that's what it is. Your relationships? What is your relationship status if you are able to share it? Relationships have been really tricky as a medical provider. You must behave with an air of professionalism. You must do people feel comfortable talking to you about very sensitive topics. So I have been very careful to balance the world by showing my personal life to some extent, and show people and remind them that I am human. I also have relationships. I play sports. I have a family. I have dogs, but I don't do it too often, because it could cause harm. My clinical interactions. So in the beginning, when I started social media, I was very open about my relationships with who I was, what was my relationship status, and I thought I was under pressure from the company belief that there was no way it could be detrimental, and in the same way I thought that reading every negative comment can only be helpful. I was wrong. Not only can it potentially harm the clinical condition. Interactions, it may cause harm to my online audience. Not dating patients, it is not what I mean, no. just an element of clinical interactions. I mean, well, as you know, if a patient is wondering who you're dating someone or who you're dating, which will derail the conversation and take it away from health, right? In the same way that it would derail the social media conversation of people listening to medical talking points at talking about personal life. So before, while I was very open about it, now I kind of said my personal life is to some extent my personal life. When I start sharing, everyone will know, it will be everywhere, but now I tend to become a little more, I have things for my personal life, but the majority of it is an open book, which is why I was curious about your relationship status. Because as a very busy person and a content creator, and going through all the things we described earlier with your mental health and feedback and all that, of course, how you managed to succeed in this field too. Yeah, so like in what I do, I feel like I'm very busy because I'm involved in so many things. A lot of different things, but I feel like everyone is busy. You know, you make time for what you're passionate about. You know, there was a period where I was single for a few years. Then I got in and out of relationships. And it really is, if you meet the right person and you want to dedicate your time to them, you will be sacrificing something that you knew before you were watching sports, like, it's my evening routine. Now I'm telling you, the last time I watched a sporting event, I was so busy. Like maybe the Ryan Garcia boxing match, but I don't have time for that because I made sacrifices to do other things that I'm passionate about. And I think if your partner is constantly saying, I think this is something I've said before, that if your partner is constantly saying they don't have time, no matter how busy they are, you have to do a little assessment and see if it's something that they really want, or at least bring up this conversation. You are someone who hits me as being quite philosophical and thinking deeply in their spare time. And probably spends a lot of time thinking about bigger questions about the meaning of life. Purpose and all those things is A and B. What are these great things you do? Considering in your mind that it is accurate but not the whole picture. Philosophical questions are rather a deep reflection from an introspective point of view to run every day. What could I have done better? What can I improve? What should I think about for the future? How can I grow from today? So I spend a lot of time doing this, and it's not something that I learned to do when I was a child. I remember this very well in high school. At the age of 13, I was very clumsy freshman year of high school. I talked to the girls in my class, then go home and sleep in my bed. I go to sleep thinking, oh my God, what should I have said to sound cool? Maybe I should have stayed quiet like that. Cool guys in movies, and replaying these scenarios throughout the day. And while it was ridiculous when I was 13, now as a doctor, I replay my patient meetings and think about what I could do better in this sense of communication. I listen to my podcast interviews again in my head, and I think about what I could do better. So I think about it constantly, and again, it's not by choice. It's just it kind of happens in my mind. And that's where the anxiety comes from. I guess anxiety can creep in there if you feeling like you're not improving, or that your progress is stagnating. Like the idea that I told you I don't exercise much. I start to ruminate and think, oh my God, you haven't exercised in so long. It's been a long time since you've been healthy. What if people online start thinking that's not a healthy thing to do? And you might start catastrophizing very easily. That's what our human minds do. And that's why cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT therapy, one of the most popular forms of evidence-based therapy, involves taking these cognitive distortions, catastrophic thoughts labeled in black or white, and simply responding to them. Say how true it is that if you got all A's on your tests and you only get a C, you are a failure. How true is it that if you don't exercise for 3 months, it means you are an out-of-shape slacker, and you have to answer to them. So doctors are not immune to cognitive distortions. I always wonder what doctors do when they deal with people like, how can health and its consequences, sometimes positive and sometimes negative, affect you? Shoulders, and how you can take that home with you, because you have to deal with a lot of people who are no longer here, yeah. Sure, especially when I was a resident and working in the ICU. Where patients in intensive care units are the sickest and therefore most likely to die. Conversations with family members about stopping CPR and signing certain newspapers to say that we are not going to give more medical care. We are only going to focus on comfort as opposed to treatment. And these conversations are not easy conversations. And the way I approach them is unbiased, the truth. Here is what I know. I want you to know what I know. I'll explain to you why I think what I think. Now you tell me what you would like to do, and finally it gives patients a sense of responsibility in a good way, where it allows them or their family members to make decisions, the right choice, and the right choice is not clear. two people can make different choices, and they're both good choices. It's the same with healthcare as art. Healthcare is as much an art as it is a science, so that two doctors can see the same patient and recommend two different treatments and not be mistaken. Has there been a particularly difficult day when you look back on your medical career? Has there been a particularly difficult day in your practice? No. Nothing particularly obvious. I think it's the way it wears on you. A perspective on the duration of the amount of administrative work you have to do, the time you want to spend with the patient versus what you have the possibility to do. Helplessness, where you cannot fully help a patient, no matter how much you want to. When you know if a patient is doing a specific treatment, you know they will get better. But they are not interested or are deceived or influenced in some way. Path where they don't go on the right path. Those really exhaust me because I think about them at night. How can I be more effective in helping my patient reach the right conclusion, or at least help them make a decision that does not actively harm their health. Your mission for now, to really help bust myths and expose misinformation. This is about healthcare, and the advice is motivated in part by the fact that as a doctor, you see the consequences firsthand. Information that your patients provide to you that is clearly false or inaccurate, or that is not, quotation marks, proven, and then you basically argue with them about it or something. That's where it comes from. Yeah. That's why I started social media. Because I was having a very similar conversation with the 30 patients I saw in one day. And I was like, wow. I managed to tell this to the world so that they can all know this information so that they don't fall for these scams where they think doctor. I had $100 this month to spend on my health. And I bought this thing. I bought these 2 smoothies, and I thought this was the answer. This will help me. It is written that it helps against cancer. And this is not the answer. And having these conversations over and over again. That's what drove the passion to be on social media. And now I think about it, medicine is different from what I thought when I started. I used to think medicine was about the doctor and the patient. Now I see it differently. In a public health sense where my impact on social media goes much further than patient interactions or viewer interactions, where I can now influence policy. I had a medical emergency on a flight and they made this call. Is there a doctor on board? And I was faced with a moment like, okay, am I volunteering? Am I stay calm? I don't know what to do. But I volunteered, and it turned out, after an investigation, that a young man, the gentleman, was in anaphylactic shock. His throat was closing. It was an allergy, and I wasn't worried. I said, "Where's your EpiPen?" He said I didn't have one. I didn't even know I had this allergy. So I asked the pilot if we could. The land pilot says it takes an hour and a half to return to Canada, and an hour to go to Portugal, to an island in Portugal. Not enough time. His throat is closing. He's going to die in 5 minutes. So I'm thinking, what can I do? I open the plan's emergency kit, thinking there would be epinephrine or an EpiPen, and there isn't. EpiPen, and I'm like, okay, what do I do now? There's no internet when you're over the Atlantic Ocean. So there's nothing to do, Google, but, I find that there is epinephrine, which is the same medication that you find in an EpiPen in a different formulation and a different dosage for cardiac arrest. So when someone's heart stops, we also give them same drug if they are flatlined. If they have a specific rhythm to try to restart the heart, so it's a much thicker drug, much longer needle. Not those cute little EpiPen needles that just stick into the side of your thigh. And I said, okay. Well, I have to do some rough calculations here. And just an estimate here. Because otherwise he'll lose his life in there. In the first class cabin, they take off his pants. They inject him with this huge needle. He screams. There's like a little bit of blood coming out. I inject the medicine. I pray that it works out and that the story moves forward quickly. I stayed with him for 8 hours for the rest of that flight until he landed. We didn't need to divert. I checked his blood pressure and pulse every 15 to 30 minutes. And, we saved his life. And you think that would be the end of it. You say to yourself, look at that. I did my job as a doctor and that's it. But I went and I was told that Saint's story on YouTube had almost 10 million views. Maybe more. Now, I don't know what that is, and, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer calls from his office, or his office calls, and says, hey, I wish I had EpiPens on airplanes. Can you support us and tell your story to the media? Yes, we tell the story we call the FAA to make these changes. And now 70% of the planes, I don't know what the exact number is, about 70% of planes that have EpiPens on board, which will never happen again. Incredible. And that's the power of social media that people don't talk about. It's public health. It's helping people who don't even need it yet. So that's the kind of medicine I like to think about now. You have half a body lying there in the corner. So in an effort to help people who use social media, asked you if you could bring I don't even know what to call it. It looks like a half mannequin or something like that. A mannequin is a mannequin, because early in my life, I was told that learning CPR was one of the simplest things you could potentially do. Things that could save my life. Because you never know. And I have people in my family who have died from various diseases. Cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, and things like that. And so I would like to relearn. This is probably not an official certification. To learn the basics of CPR and how to keep someone alive in such a situation. Could you bring the, what should we call him? We'll call him Mike. Yeah, we'll call him a baby Mike. So I'm curious, before I do anything, some kind of instruction on this. What do you know so far about CPR? And all wrong answers are acceptable here. You push in the chest, roughly around the top of the rib cage. Then you blow into the mouth, and you do this over and over again until they come back to life. Okay, do you know what the reason for CPR is? Is a really good question, and it's not a trick question. I'm just really curious because I like to know where we start from. There, and nobody knows it anyway. That's why I do what I do, so it's not something to do be keeping oxygen flowing through the body, through the blood. You're on the right track. Okay, so the goal of CPR is if you find someone who is unconscious, not breathing, has no pulse, which means their heart is not beating, which means clinically they're dead. So anything you do here can only potentially harm. The aid it can't hurt. Can it? Because the person is already dead. So by doing proper CPR, what you do is you compress the chest. Chest compressions to squeeze the heart, which contains blood to circulate blood throughout the body that still contains residual oxygen to deliver oxygen to vital organs, so you're not actually saving someone's life by performing CPR. You're buying it. The purpose of CPR is to allow time for first responders to intervene, arrive to then give advanced cardiac support. Oh, okay. And that's why the first step of cardiopulmonary resuscitation has nothing to do with the person, and everything to do with deal with the call for help. Okay, so I call first responders, or because that ideally you would never want to do anything that would distract you from starting chest compressions. Because the sooner you can start doing chest compressions, the better your results will be. So tell someone else to call. Ideally, if you're alone. Obviously, it doesn't happen. But you can't just openly say, hey, someone call 911.